Hi, everybody. Welcome. I hope you're all having a great conference. My name is Ariel Troster, and I'm a city councillor in Ottawa in a ward called Somerset Ward, which is one of the two most downtown neighborhoods. My ward is 6 kilometers square, and it is the most populated, densely populated. So as you can imagine, we have some pretty tremendous challenges when it comes to homelessness and addiction. But we also have some incredible innovations, which I'm here to talk to you about. I have only been in office for 3 years, and before that, I worked in community organizing, I worked in the labor sector, I worked for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I was always lobbying from the outside, and now I'm an insider. So it was challenging for me at first to get used to my new role, and finding ways to work with advocates and with housing practitioners and with city staff. And I know we have a lot of Ottawa city staff here from the housing and homelessness group, so shout out to you. So I wanted to bring this panel together. Now, the description is a little misleading because it says hear from elected officials, and you're getting me, official, and 3 wonderful community practitioners. But I wanted to talk about 3 really fantastic projects which are great examples of how the community housing sector can help move policy with municipal government. So we can talk a little bit about how our roles differed in these specific situations and then open up a conversation about how we can work together. So that is me. I am Ariel. I'm also so glad to have Michelle Hurtubise here, who is the Executive Director of the Centretown Community Health Centre, which is the community health centre in my neighborhood, one of 2. Prior to joining Centretown, she was an executive director for over 30 years in a variety of settings, including community healthcare centers, children and youth mental health organizations, and in violence against women organizations. She identifies as a cisgender bisexual woman. I'm also a queer person. I also have Olivia O'Connor from Acorn Hamilton. So she's a head organizer with Hamilton Acorn. She organizes low to moderate, low income communities in Hamilton to fight for social and financial reform. Olivia's work involves building leaders and power in the community to push for change at all levels of government. And previously, she was a canvas manager for 4 years at the Toronto Environmental Alliance. So she knows quite a lot about campaigning. And I have Emily McLean here, who works for an incredible organization in Ottawa called Operation Come Home that works on youth homelessness, who is representing a project called Housing Works Ottawa, which I can't wait to tell you about. So she's the housing coordinator at Operation Come Home. Emily and her team focus on expanding affordable housing options and strengthening supports for youth experiencing homelessness. She's committed to fostering collaboration across sectors and has been successful in creating sustainable housing solutions and positive partnerships between landlords and developers, which actually does happen between the sector, and we're going to tell you about a great example. So first, I would like to invite Michelle up here to talk about a project that is very dear to my heart. Centretown in Ottawa is the first community to benefit from a 24-hour-a-day non-police crisis response service called Anchor, which is something the community fought for a very long time. We have about a year worth of data and some really cool stories to tell. And Michelle's going to come up and tell you about where the push from the community for this project came from and what promising results we've been seeing.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So first off, Anchor stands for the Alternative Neighborhood Community, Alternative Neighborhood Crisis Response. And it was really born out of what many of us are familiar with, which was individuals who were being harmed, particularly from racialized communities, from Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities, when police were called or when they called the police and a mental health and substance use crisis was going on. One of the really pivotal key factors in our community was the death of Abdi Burham Abdi, who, while he was housed with his family, he did have a significant mental health illness and was having some conflict at a coffee shop. And basically, when the police came, he was of Somali background. When the police came, he ran and they subdued him with lasers and died by violence by police. And so there was a coalition called the Coalition for Abdi Burham Abdi. And as part of that, my fellow CHC, Somerset West Community Health Centre, had hosted that, but a number of the other community health centres and community resource centres in Ottawa were heavily involved. And we issued a report called Rethinking Community Safety. And we wanted to be able to provide options to the police response. The city had started with forming the Guiding Council, Ottawa Guiding Council for Mental Health and Addictions in 2022, and they did a number of consultations. We also had a number of community activists. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge them, that were also pushing for those substantive changes. One of the recommendations that was made was for Anchor, which was to be provided as a 24/7 non-police response, calling a number other than 911 when people were in crisis, and to have those with lived and living experience of mental health and substance use to be the ones responding as peers in a pair of two. So it wasn't, some of them do have social worker or other training, but many of them have really come up from the peer support network, and that's where we've hired and trained from. And so we launched this actually a year ago this August, and so a little bit over a year of data. With this data, in our first year, we had 1,130 calls made in the first year, and Anchor teams were dispatched 626 times. So just to help you understand, they called 211 instead of 911. The community navigators at CNEO, which is the Central Navigation of Eastern Ontario, they help triage, and sometimes they're referring them to other community resources that can wait, and then they determine where they're going to go, and the calls that can be responded to come to our community crisis response workers. We have 2 vans, we have 2 teams of 2 people running 16 hours a day, and 1 van running with just 1 team for the remainder of the 8 hours. Over 92% of the crisis interactions were handled by Anchor teams with no police involvement. So there was no requirement. Yeah, right? And a lot of community members would call Anchor instead of 911 because they knew there was 0 risk of them being charged. There was 0 risk of them being harmed, but also we would work to connect them with other community resources and supports. Anchor is available to anyone with a mental health and substance use crisis, but a large, so like if somebody is calling, a mom is worried about their teenager who has expressed suicidal thoughts, we will absolutely go to someone's home and respond there. But the majority of our calls still come from individuals who are living rough. Or people who are more likely, it's not coming from them, it's more coming from people who are concerned when they're seeing people. And 126 of those clients were found in crisis while our team was driving around in the community, and then received support from the Anchor crisis response team. So sometimes, and this is a really good example, Ariel and I are like attached at a texting hip, and she'll send me, and she's like, there's a little bit of a hot spot in this corner over here, and I can dispatch the team and say, can you go check out this hot spot? And the team will drive it around. And then once they've identified a hot spot, they will keep adding it to their list and making sure that whenever they have quiet time or downtime and not responding to a call, that they will go and check that out. Next slide. So a couple of key things to make this a reality is we were building relationships all the time from for like years and years, inside and outside of the service area. And I think that that was really essential. A big part of the conversation with Ariel, but also her predecessor, was as we're looking at this, we were having conversations and they were helping us strategize. So particularly, we're really fortunate. We have very supportive city councillors in the area that I'm operating who are very supportive of this. but we also needed the vote of all of council. So it would be like, how do you want to strategize? Like, what's our best way to approach the kind of maybe votes that they could swing either way? What's the best way to approach those who are absolute no's? But maybe we can kind of get them to yes if we give them the right kind of metrics that will help them make sense of that. And some of that was honestly, if we can divert calls away from police, then police can go do real police jobs. And for some of them, that's the thing is like, they didn't really care about our project, but if you could have police responding better, that would help them satisfy the needs of their constituents who wanted more police response. So we have those systems for ongoing communication that are also offline. This is not through regular channels of having those conversations, but you have to build that trust that we can have those offline conversations and neither one of us is going anywhere else to tell them about what, councillor said or what I said or whatever said within that. And we really focused on how we could also leverage those programs to support the needs. So we're not really supposed to, in our funding, be driving around and dispersing hotspots, but driving around and dispersing hotspots helps take the pressure off of our city councillors from the residents who are calling them, and we want them to be calling other members of council and saying Anchor is the most amazing program. How come you can't expand it everywhere? So responding to hotspots makes some sense, but it also builds us, our team's relationship with those individuals who are in those hotspots so that if we are responding to something at another time, we actually already have a relationship with them, and that's really critical. And then the final point that I want to note, and that we have invested a lot of time and energy in, I'm fortunate I do come from a fairly large community health center, as is my sister CHC Somerset West. And so we have spent a lot of time with our data, the options, and other programs to model with leading practices. So our Rethinking Community Safety, we actually had a ton of options for council to think about that had costing, money, return on investment, who we thought we could reach, what we thought the outcome was, whether we were talking youth homelessness or homelessness caused by intimate partner violence, or whether we were talking about the targeting of racialized communities. And the feedback that we got from even those councillors who were not our fans was that it actually gave them really something measurable and tangible that they could look at. A lot of them took information and just absolutely cut and pasted from our report into some of their pieces and submissions and responses. So we've found a way to work then really effectively across actually the whole city, leveraging some of our most supportive city councillors' strengths and insights along the way.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to have lots of questions after as we talk about how things happen here, but I will say that as a city councillor in the neighborhood where this project started for the first time, I think we also had a role to play because we are really invested in the success of Anchor and we want to see it scaled up across the city. So when I was hearing things like, things didn't go so well with the dispatch yesterday, there was somebody who waited on the call for 20 minutes, I could call Michelle, her team could go through, look at the data, figure out what happened, and we can figure out how to fix it so that the next time it wouldn't happen that way. So that was the thing too, my inbox, as you can imagine, is very interesting. But when I hear things, I could kind of channel it through back channels to try to get those improvements moving. And I'll admit, it was a little.
There were some bumps.
Yeah, there's some bumps. Like the first, I don't know, like the 211 operators that are normally used to taking more informational calls maybe weren't really understanding the crisis piece as much. And their sort of questionnaire when you called them was really long. And it was like, yeah, but this is a crisis. Like I expect this to be like calling 911. So, it took a while to get that right, but I think we've reached a sweet spot. So. Awesome. So now I'd like to invite Olivia from Hamilton Acorn. So something that I've been involved with as a city councillor is pushing for our very own renoviction bylaw in Ottawa. In Ottawa right now, we lose 31 affordable apartments for every one we build. 31. And that is largely due to the fact that there is no provincial vacancy control in Ontario. So the landlords can raise the rent as much as they want between tenants, which creates an incentive to evict. And so I was really inspired by work that was happening in Hamilton, and we really are piggybacking off of their success. And I'm very interested to hear, because Hamilton Acorn worked very actively with Hamilton City Council, specifically a really wonderful councillor named Narendra Nunn, who very much wanted to be here. So I'd like to welcome Olivia to tell us a little bit more about how you got it done.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Olivia. I'm a head organizer with Acorn Canada based in Hamilton, Ontario. I've been working with the organization since 2018. Really excited to join this panel today, so thank you so much to the Ottawa Councillor for organizing it. Just a little bit more about Acorn, if folks are unfamiliar. We're a local to national tenant union. Our mandate is to build power in low and moderate income neighborhoods. It's our members who are low and moderate income families and individuals who decide our campaigns and the tactics for the group. We're multi-issue, probably best recognized for taking action on housing issues, but we work on everything. In Hamilton, we have an affordable transit campaign to, at the national level, a fair banking campaign. And we did win a big victory of putting a cap on NSFEs in Canada. Organizers work with our members so they can have the skills and tools to build the group. So I'll be speaking about our municipal campaign for tenant protections against rent eviction, how we organize low and moderate income tenants to fight for this bold local policy, how we worked with a group of city councillors, overcame numerous challenges and roadblocks, and a bit of an update of how the bylaw is working 10 months in. So just a bit of a 101 for how Acorn does our campaigns and kind of the important elements. So, campaigns don't just happen. They're a lot of hard work. We have in our mind, the big rallies or a vote at City Hall, but the largest percentage of time in the campaign is spent planning, talking to people one-on-one, building relationships, getting people to actions, reacting to our opposition. Luckily in Hamilton, the landlord lobby wasn't too strong, but I know they're more outspoken in other cities, and refining our strategy. So a simple breakdown of a campaign. We had our target, which in this case was the city of Hamilton. We had our demands early on. We did research, looking at what other jurisdictions in Canada, if anything, was being done. We came across a city in British Columbia, New Westminster, which was the first city in that province to enact local protections, putting the burden of tenant displacement on landlords. And then the final part of a campaign, how do we create the power to force the target, the city, to do what our members want? So we start by understanding, the most pressing issues, faced by community members. The wider and deeper the appeal of the issue, the better. So listening for issues that people feel strongly about, they're angry about, but making sure it's an issue, your organization can do something on. So an issue has to be realizable, in theory winnable, so understanding the legislative change and concrete goals. So rent eviction, this was the second issue in Hamilton that we organized a campaign around. The first big issue being neglectful landlords, which kind of hand in hand with this campaign, which we, kind of parallel to our rent eviction campaign, we have a safe apartment bylaw in Hamilton, similar to landlord licensing programs in Mississauga and Toronto in Ontario. So for the rent eviction issue, it started with a tenant, joining the association. They were worried that their new landlord wanted to push out all the tenants. Within 6 months, all tenants were bullied to accept lowball offers, cash for keys, so that the landlord could renovate and increase the rents. This was late 2018 and the first time rent eviction was covered in the local media, and really the start of Hamilton being targeted by investors using the N13 process in Ontario. For folks not in Ontario, this is a no-fault eviction under the guise of major renovations. They're able to temporarily, or supposed to be temporary eviction, but how it plays out on the ground, landlords never honor their first right of refusal. We have yet to see where there was one N13, a landlord let tenants back in. There was under 10 N13s in 2012. It increased to over 100 last year. We don't have the data for this year yet. But this only captures, tenants that are going to the provincial tribunal to challenge it. In 2020, we did a 3-month organizing drive to start this new campaign and launch our demands for a Made in Hamilton bylaw, similar to the one that New West implemented. We did a rally and press conference in front of City Hall with over 100 ACORN members, tenants, and allies. And during the organizing drive, we held 3 campaign organizing meetings for our members to put together our demands, plan how to launch the campaign, and strategize how to get council to act. The next step was meeting with as many city councilors as possible, relevant city staff, to find a champion to bring forward a motion, which happened late 2020. We really focused on finding a councillor that was seen as more moderate, didn't have as many renters in their ward to bring forward the first motion. Obviously, we wouldn't have won this without the more progressive urban councillors leading the way, but showing that we had other support early on was really key. One councillor in particular was Ward 3 Narinder Nan, who couldn't join today, but she was our biggest champion. She was at our first action in 2018, even before she was elected, and saw it to the end over 2 council terms. So we were up against that this was never done in Ontario, and pushback from city staff that it wasn't possible, that it was outside of the city's jurisdiction. We held events with council champions from New Westminster and their city staff, invited Hamilton city councilors and staff, and the New West shared that they heard the same thing early on in their campaign, that it wasn't possible. So they talked about needing a change in culture among staff. Despite all our efforts, the first staff report in April 2021 came back not recommending a Hamilton bylaw, but we kept organizing. We showed up in huge numbers to council to get another motion back to send staff to work on it. This wouldn't have happened without Councillor Nan, who had the most rent evictions in her ward, backing us up. Over 2021, 2023, we had kind of more ups and downs. It was the middle of COVID. Staff had moved on to other priorities, and we got a pretty similar report back in spring of 2023, not recommending a bylaw. So we showed up with even more members and allies to speak about the devastating impact of rent eviction. We submitted a legal opinion from a law clinic to support our demands that cities do have the power, and we got more of our allies to delegate and support as well. In August to October 2023, we had the biggest momentum shift. Finally, staff had written a bylaw, and the final stretch was making sure the bylaw checked all the boxes we were looking for. So temporary accommodation and rental top-up to ensure tenants can exercise their first right of refusal, tenants informed of their rights when given an N13, and high enough fines to dissuade landlords from hopefully not applying for the license in the first place. This was in January 2024. We delegated in support of the bylaw for the first time, and council passed with unanimous support for the councillors who could vote. So just some keys to the campaign. So, campaigns are not won overnight. They take a lot of time, hard work, but organizing works. I remember back in 2019, when we first delegated to council on rent eviction, we were trying to stop a landlord who was doing rent eviction from getting city money. We lost the vote, and one councillor, did some kind of public publicity saying that no tenant in Hamilton had ever been rent evicted. They never met anyone that had dealt with this. 6 years later, we had all of council on board to take bold local action. So, perseverance. Our members saw the ups and downs of the campaign. Not giving up when it gets hard. We didn't go away. So some of our municipal campaigns across Canada, have taken years, but organizing works. People power. We launched the campaign with a big event. Whenever we start a new campaign, we call it an organizing drive. It takes about 3 months. Press coverage, we wanted everyone in Hamilton to know how big the issue was. Showing precedent, in other jurisdictions, forming relationships with those elected officials to be allies in our local fight. We met with as many city councilors to ask for their support. We did regular follow-ups, check-ins, over the length of the campaign. Having members from their wards in those meetings and contacting them before important votes was really important. Delegations at City Hall was a very powerful tool, prioritizing the experience of low-income vulnerable tenants, seniors, low-wage workers, tenants with disabilities. And hearing directly from tenants, we found that councillors were really sympathetic. Maybe they weren't good, in our opinion, on all issues related to housing, but they could get behind that it was bad if landlords were going to kick tenants out for profit. Mentioned our written submissions, so we had a legal opinion. At one point, we totally rewrote the bylaw to include what we wanted and submitted that to the city. And just really, having info on how the New West bylaw worked. So, we kept an eye on progress of the work behind the scenes. Staff aren't elected, but they hold a lot of power because they're the ones drafting the policy. So, we tried to meet with city staff regularly, have good relationships. At one point, they even hired a consultant that we made sure we met with them frequently. Getting broad support for tenant protections, including wards without that didn't have a lot of renters, and just really showing community power, relentless organizing, diverse actions. A lot were in front of buildings, facing rent evictions and rallies at City Hall before votes. But we also did an action in front of a landlord's business seminar. We did a walking tour, visiting different buildings in Ward 3 with Councillor Nan. So that we could have candidates running and be able to commit to support before they were elected and making sure they understood the issue. Press coverage, especially leading up to a vote. A couple times we were front page of the newspaper the day before. It went back to council. Social media, we'd share like all the N13s and predatory notices from landlords and sending those posts to elected official, and just really trying to demonstrate the benefit of preserving market affordable housing. It's better for everyone to keep tenants in their affordable homes. And we had lots of allies on the campaigns, legal clinic, other housing groups, professors came and spoke, other environmental groups, so that really strengthened our voice. It wasn't just tenants calling for this. So just to wrap up, just a bit of an update of how the bylaw is working. We don't have a public report yet from the city, but Acorn's on the front line of fighting these rent evictions, so we can kind of share what we've seen so far. We do know the city has received or approved one license, but on our end, we've only had one building with new N13s in 2025 that filed at the Landlord Tenant Board, and they have since withdrew at the board and their city license because they didn't want to comply with the bylaw. So it's working, and there's been no challenge from landlords that the city didn't have the jurisdiction, because that was a big kind of flag that city staff had raised. So there's a lot of exciting moments of the campaign, but it wouldn't have happened with everything in between: the big rallies, the council meetings, the conversations with tenants at their doors, phone calls, tenant meetings, having councillors as strong on the issue as Acorn members. Governments can move a lot slower than we would like, but for us, this was worth fighting for. And now Acorn's expertise is really valued. We're one of the partners in Hamilton's tenant support program, which is new, and we've been leading the fight in other municipalities in Ontario. So Toronto, London have passed a bylaw, and cities like Ottawa, Peel, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Guelph are fighting for them as well. So thank you so much.
She's amazing, right? Yeah, and I have to say, I had a very similar situation. So I brought forward the motion to create a rent eviction bylaw in Ottawa, and staff were extremely skeptical, and they asked me for 3 key check-in points. So first, we had them check on the feasibility of whether they thought we should proceed. And they also came back with a no recommendation. And it is exceptionally rare to pass something against staff recommendation in Ottawa. Like, it's very rare. But we also had a tricky situation where our housing and homelessness staff were 100% for this, and this was bylaw review staff, right? Like, this was a different city department. And I said, okay, tell me what is the issue? And it really actually came down to workload. So then my office is able to say, tell us what's on your work plan and let's go through it. Let's find things that are like low priority. And in the end, I was able to put a motion forward displacing 2 pieces of work. One was about regulation of leaf blowers. Another one actually was about body rub parlors, but we were not hearing about body rub parlors, and I'm the ward that seems to have the most of them. So we were able to put a motion forward that created the space for staff to do the work, because we said, what do you need from us? And they're like, we need time and resources. We're like, how do we create those time and resources for you? And I went on a relentless charm campaign of talking to 24 counselors. I've never talked on the phone so much in my life. And building on the Hamilton example, I was like, okay, so this counselor, who's my colleague, really cares about seniors. I got to connect a senior with this guy, so he really hears from them. And also at our committee hearing, the Council on Aging really got involved, because the number 1 profile that we're seeing of people who are being reno-evicted in my ward are senior women. Senior women on a fixed income becoming homeless for the first time after paying their rent for their whole lives. right? So anyway, we have one more committee meeting to go when the draft bylaw comes back in the spring. But during the meeting, I was texting with with Ottawa Acorn people the whole time too, because we can provide insider knowledge around the table. We can, and at first I was like, how many people you're bringing to committee? They're like 25. I was like, do not bring 25 people. Bring your 5 best, right? And avoid personal attacks on councillors. Like, here's my strategy of how you're going to get an audience that is sympathetic. And those delegates were so good. They brought people to tears that you would never expect, right? Because the power of that personal narrative is so, so positive. And what I said was, instead of doing an email campaign, because when we get those things, I used to send out those emails all the time before I was elected. And now they go right into an email filter because our inboxes get overwhelmed. Find a person from each ward who can tell a personal story to each one of those city councillors, and that really got people over the edge, to the point that one very conservative suburban councillor actually said, I wasn't going to support this, but Councillor Troster called me and, did she read The Art of the Deal or something? Because she convinced me, what the heck? It's like, no, I did not read that. But it was very funny, the power of personal connection and personal conversation, and people who I'd never called before were like, that's weird, you're calling me. I thought you already have the votes for this. Why are you bothering? And I was like, because I want to talk to you about it, because I think it's important. And even people who voted against it were like, you know what, fair play. You got the votes. I'm not going to support this, but I'm also not going to fight it. And in the end, the mayor didn't know until literally they called his name at the end how he was going to vote, and he ended up voting yes, and we won that vote 19-4. So, and it was unexpected, against a recommendation by staff. And I love city staff. And you know what? Now staff are working on it, and we created the space for them to do it, and they're having a good time. So, I think there's ways to, but I also didn't bash staff, right? I didn't publicly disparage them. I said, what is the roadblock here? And I will say one of the big challenges is jurisdiction, because we wouldn't have to do this if we actually had provincial vacancy control. The province is creating a problem for us. Another thing that councillors wanted was to build in more time for the province to respond, because there are actually changes to the Residential Tenancies Act that were technically passed that are sitting there on the books that had never been enacted. And if they were enacted, we might not need a bylaw like this. So, my mayor and my fellow colleagues, the more conservative ones, were like, let's give them, because it was just around the time of the provincial election. So we were like, let's just give it a little bit more time to see if they'll respond. So we did. They didn't, and now we're developing the bylaw. So, it's all about getting to yes. What do you need to get to yes? So thank you, Olivia. It really shows all of the strategies need to work together. So now I'm so happy to introduce Emily from Operation Come Home. This is a project that is very close to my heart, and she will explain why. An incredible program called Housing Works, which has the potential to end youth homelessness in Ottawa, and to do it quickly, because what they're doing is so cool. And so, Emily, why don't you come up and tell us a bit more about this? Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Like all the other speakers here, I am very excited to be here. I'm happy I'm tall enough to see over the podium. I wore heels just for this. So I was at the Halifax conference. It was my first CAEH conference as just someone in the audience. So this is a very exciting opportunity. I'm excited to share about Housing Works with you. Like Ariel said, we are excited about what we're doing. Our program is growing rapidly, which is, hopefully going to end youth homelessness in Ottawa.
They're apparently putting together a lot of IKEA furniture right now, which is going to tell you why.
Our experts in IKEA furniture, so if you need us, call us. So for those of you who don't know about head leasing, or master leasing is what we used to call it, Housing Works is a subsidiary of Operation Come Home. So Operation Come Home is a service hub that works with youth experiencing homelessness. We work with youth age 16 to 24. So Housing Works came to be in 2022 because our housing team was having difficulty finding units for our youth. During COVID, we were finding lots of apartments. We were able to house youth somewhat quickly, and then that kind of stopped. So Housing Works was our solution. How can we engage landlords and have available, affordable, long-term housing that's safe for our youth to live in? So Housing Works. We enter into commercial lease agreements with landlords, property owners, and developers. We then are able to put our youth into these units as occupants under occupancy agreements. So occupancy agreements are kind of like a lease. However, they're a little bit special in that we engage youth in, they have to engage in supports. So they're supported throughout their occupancy. And the occupancy agreements also allow us to work with our landlords. So our landlords have the opportunity to work with us. They have a 24/7 property manager that works with them. They have someone that's going to vet their tenants when they move in. They have guaranteed rent payments, so you can bet that that is a bonus for our landlords. They love that. And then for our youth, they have us who are trained in supporting them. They know that they're going to be working with someone in their housing that knows what knows what they are going through. They can turn to us if they need support. However, we're also going to support them in building the life skills needed to maintain their housing long term. So these occupancy agreements are 3 years long, as are the lease agreements with the landlords, the commercial lease agreements. After the 3 years, if an occupant is still in the unit, they then graduate to a typical lease with the owner. The rent stays the same, so they're guaranteed to have affordable rent. And right now, we actually just renewed our first agreement with a landlord, which is very exciting. So this is our 3rd year. Our first landlord renewed with us. So we, up until recently, let's say May, had 28 units. So from 2022 until May of 2025, we had 28 units. We can actually go to the next slide. We now have 176 units, which is so we have 176 units. 80 of these units currently have occupants in them. Until March of 2026, we will fill the rest, which is extremely exciting. We work with 19 developers, landlords, property owners, and 16 of those have actually, throughout our terms, offered more units. They reach out, they offer us another apartment, they offer us future apartments, they offer us future builds, and I think that speaks to the relationships that we've been able to build with these landlords and property owners. So all of this came to be because of one small lunch and learn that we had in March with Ariel. Ariel came to us and said, what can I do to help this project? This project is going to be big. Your program is going to, solve youth homelessness, hopefully. And we had the lunch and learn. This lunch and learn gave us a platform, which is really what we needed to be able to connect with landlords and developers, to connect with other counselors, and really get our message out. We want to end youth homelessness, so what do we need to be able to do that? We need units, and we need affordable units, and we need safe units. So how do we get community buy-in? When I was at the Halifax conference, that was a big message of that conference, was we need community buy-in, and we need it now. So Ariel's platform.
We called it speed dating.
We did.
But basically what we did was we called every developer we know who's brought a development application to my office. And I got other counselors to do the same. And we got them in a room, and Operation Come Home's other social enterprise that does catering fed them. And we basically did a speed dating session. Like, we went table to table, and they gave the pitch. And this also came at a really convenient time because we, for the first time, have a affordable housing community improvement plan, which are subsidies to private landlords to provide average market rent units. But I also knew that a lot of public money was going into private developers, and they weren't able to offer that deep affordability. And the cool thing about this program is they get subsidies from from Children's Aid for youth aging out of foster care. So they're able to take those somewhat affordable apartments and make them even more affordable. So it was like an easy sell. It was like, and you get guaranteed rent, and they provide a free property manager 24 hours a day. So if some kid's toilet overflows,
I'm there.
Yeah. Either Emily, frankly, John Heckbert, the CEO, has been known to have to drive with a plunger at 2 a.m. So anyway.
So this lunch and learn, it gave us an opportunity for our team, for Ariel's team, and for all of the developers that were willing to come to be in the same room and just learn about what we were doing. My messaging to my team was, talk to as many people as you can today and sell our program. And they did it. They did an amazing job. Ariel speaks about our program in any room that she's in, and it's always positive things, and that is really what's gotten us across the finish line. So after that event, my phone was ringing off the hook. And we very quickly, we got, I think, 3 units that first week, another unit the following Monday, and then by the end of that following week, I got a phone call that said, hey, I have 140 units that I want to offer you at AMR. And I said, huh? I said, my AMR that I work with, that's, 14, 15 at that point for a 1-bedroom. He said, yeah, that sounds about right. So that is when our program took off. And so that is where we're at. And, I guess my messaging is it started with that very small lunch and learn. That was our engagement with our city official. That was the platform that we had, and that was the platform that we used that expanded our program to what it is today. It allowed us to decrease stigma. It allowed us to get our messaging to landlords. It allowed us to get what we were doing out to them and for them to see the benefit of the program. And that was our community buy-in.
Yeah, they had no advertising budget, and literally all we did was hold one lunch.
We fed them, and that was it.
We fed them, we talked to them. So, I think the answer here too is, and it was also a great sell because they're like, we're not even asking you for money.
Yeah.
We just want apartments that we will pay fair market rent for.
Yeah.
And they were like, what's the catch? We're like, there's literally no catch. And they were like, no, really? Really?
Yeah. 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 So, it also gave us an opportunity to bring in some of our smaller landlords to speak about their experience, which, our smaller landlords who were getting invited to City Hall to speak about a program that they, a lot of them are also very passionate about, was really, really powerful. I often get developers calling and saying, hey, I'd like to speak to a current landlord. And we are lucky enough to have those landlords that want to speak to our program and would probably sit up here with me today and speak about how great our program is doing, even with the piles of garbage that sometimes end up next to the unit or, the holes in the wall that sometimes happen. But I think that speaks to my team's response to those issues and just the relationships that we're able to build.
So what got me hooked was when John Heckbird, the executive director, said, if we hold 300 leases, we can empty the youth shelters in Ottawa. And I was like, let's do it.
Yes.
And they're at what, like 200, 250 now?
Yeah,
leases?
we will be.
Yeah. And so now Youth Services Bureau in Ottawa is telling us that once this is fully scaled up, they can convert floors of our youth shelters into supportive housing, right? So this is stopping homelessness at the source, and it's very exciting. Both this and a renoviction bylaw stopping an unjust eviction. So it's 2 ways to turn off the tap, and this is part of what led the mayor to making an announcement a few weeks ago that Ottawa is set to end youth homelessness by 2030. It's largely because of this program. So,
Thank you.
so now I thought we'll get into a little bit of a fireside chat conversation. I'm curious to hear. Maybe I'll start with you, Michelle. I'm interested to hear who your initial supporters were for Anchor, and then who the unlikely allies were that came on board later, and what made that happen.
Yeah, I think that for us, there was, at the time that we started doing this, we actually had a very, very, very divided city council. This was before Ariel was elected. And where the votes were predictable 100% of the time. There were those who were voting with the mayor, and then there were what we would call the progressive votes. And so a lot of our early support came from those progressive votes, and this was, and because we had started doing this work in 2020, leading into just before the pandemic was declared, 2019, 2020, and having some of those conversations, and then 2021. And so at that time, I was actually at an organization that did not have supportive counselors, or had a supportive counselor that was not able to be publicly supportive. So what was one of the things that was happening is that in order for him to get the things that he needed for his ward, he would vote with the mayor, even though he was actually quite supportive of a number of things that we were looking for. So it was helpful to have conversations with him, and I could have those conversations. But it was really the cohort of your predecessor, Catherine McKinney, their wise words of counsel, a counselor called Jeff Leeper, and the other one that was part of that was actually Ralston King, and how to attach it to the gender equity and anti-racism work that was happening from the city. And so being able to have those conversations, they gave us lots of feedback actually on our early drafts of rethinking community safety to say, don't stop that language and look at some other language. Interestingly enough, I mean, I think a number of our public deputations to the police services, because at the same time that this was happening and these conversations and we were advancing this, the police were obviously also advancing for significant increases in their budget. And they had actually done a really horrific report that had actually been successful in Edmonton, where they took a report and said, here's all the money that is spent on social services. And they included all of the money in Ottawa that went to social assistance, any not-for-profit, so Red Cross, Canadian Liver Foundation, the rights of homeowners in, whatever, if there was a nonprofit located in Ottawa, they counted that as money that it was. So instead of when we said, the police budget, and I'm making up numbers, is, $175 million. What is,
It was more than $400 million.
there you go. See, I even underestimate. I can't imagine that much money. And the amount of money that was being spent on social services was $24 million. And the police services came back and said, it's not $24 million. It is $1.6 billion that goes to social services, because they were counting all of the nonprofits, all of the social assistance. And so we went actually to the police services, and three of our early allies around that were three of the people appointed actually by the province at that time, which was interesting because they were appointed by a very conservative politician, Doug Ford, and they started questioning these outrageous numbers, and it was actually allies that were sitting on the police services board that we actually had behind the scenes conversations that we didn't really expect, because actually the police made a really fatal error in judgment about pulling out and saying that things like Canadian Red Cross and like the Hemophiliac Society of Canada were part of the social safety net that should be counted as social services, and that police were actually being underfunded in comparison to all of those funds. So that was a bit of a surprise turn for us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I also find, when in doubt, go with the economic argument, because the numbers actually make sense for us. Now, I will say the challenge we have now is we're looking to expand Anchor, but our own mayor is like, well, we won't take the money from police, we'll take it from somewhere else. Well, I'm not sure where that else is. And I've also directly asked the police chief, look, if we're diverting and detasking like thousands of calls from police, should that not result in a decrease in the police budget? And I get, well, but there's new crime now. I mean, changing police culture is really, really tough. But what Anchor is doing is providing an alternative, which I appreciate. But on the economic argument piece, especially when it comes to fighting homelessness, like the numbers don't lie. Supportive housing is $4,000 a month. Shelter is $6,000. Prison is $12,000 or $15,000. But I do think the challenge we have is that it's often spread out over different balance sheets, right? So it's like the paramedics are the city, and then the ER is the province, and the jail might be federal, and so the full cost isn't borne in one place. But I do find also with the renovictions piece, for example, me arguing that, look, if people are made homeless who could otherwise stay in their housing, the city has to pay to house them, and it's not a good outcome for them or for anyone else. Olivia, I'm interested in digging in a bit more and how you overturn that initial no from staff, because I know I had to have a lot of conversations, and when that staff report came back recommending against a renoviction bylaw, you bet I was on the phone to Narendra Nan in Hamilton going, what did you do? what's the next strategy? So that's my other suggestion, make friends, right? Like make friends in other cities. If you're a city councilor, hang out with other city councilors. I see some really cool ones in the room here. Learn and steal from each other. It's very, very positive. But tell me about how you fought that effectively.
Sure. So initially, like when the first staff report came back, as we were a bit like caught off guard because we were meeting with staff like leading up to that first report back. So in Hamilton, maybe it's similar. At municipalities, you only see like the staff report like 1 week before it goes to committees. So once the report was out, we kind of quickly organized to make sure we had that numbers at the committee to show that there was strong community support and that we didn't support the staff recommendation not to do anything. We had conversations with Nurn, reached out to other councillors to get them on board to also go against the staff recommendation. We were successful that first time. A motion was passed to send it back to staff, and then we just really wanted to kind of use the relationships we had now with staff and city councillors from New West BC. So we did 2 online town halls a few months after that first report back, not suggesting not to do anything, and we invited city councillors, Hamilton city staff to hear directly from New Westminster, BC, kind of their process to get their bylaw off the ground. The bylaw was working. So we had, the director of like housing services attend, a number of city councillors. So I think that kind of slowly tried to flip. And then just, having good relationships, with city staff, even though we were coming out, at committees to delegate, that we didn't, agree, behind the scenes, we're very, professional and, building relationships with those staff. But we just, kept organizing. I think, our delegations, really kind of tipped the scales too. And we heard directly from councillors that it was the delegations that really, got them to buy in that Hamilton needed to figure this out. And then, being able for councillors to have those conversations with city staff that, no, we passed a motion, like we want to have a rent eviction bylaw in Hamilton. And then a key element as well was getting like a legal opinion outside of like not from the city, the city solicitor, coming from a more cautious approach, not wanting to take risk. We brought like a legal firm to write a legal opinion that no, cities do have the power. And in Ontario, at least, every time landlords have challenged like the licensing mechanism, like the cities have won. So just trying to remind, the precedent there, like in Ontario.
I appreciate you talking about relationship building, because something that I would also offer is if you are building a trust relationship with a municipal official or with a staff member, like protect that relationship. If you want to keep getting that back channel information and then you get mad at something they do, don't go online and, slam them. Pick up the phone and ask what's going on first. Because I'll tell you, I've been burned a few times. And I am not immune to criticism. I understand. I am an elected official, criticize away. But there are definitely allies that I've worked with very closely. And then I've opened my phone one day and been like, what? And it damages that relationship. And if what you're doing is building a sustainable relationship, understanding that city staff and city councilors, and politicians, we are human beings too. We care about the work. And if there's something that you have a question about, and if you have a longstanding relationship, just pick up the phone before you rant on the internet. I know I don't need to tell all of you this, but it can be challenging sometimes, right?
But I think that was one of Loretta Ross's messages this morning too, was, we spent a lot of time in radical action, and I know that I can get really high on my soapbox and very convinced of my high moral ground. But I think the piece is that then also inviting in of that, also a bit of radical acceptance and radical trust within the piece to say, and I've also I've also learned that, I can have that, but I can have the conversation in a different way. And I know, it also means that I know that in this particular instance, City Council has my back, but also the piece I want to invite within that, I've also worked in cities where I have not had a supportive councillor or necessarily within the community. And it's trying to find that piece of the 2% that you can agree on, even if it doesn't feel like it's really great agreement. And the example that I use is is I do truly believe that most people who run for public office are doing so because they want to make their community better. Now, we may have radically different ideas about what making the community better looks like, but if I can even find the common ground on, okay, we both want something better for this community, then I can keep in conversation and dialogue, and I can at least know that they will hear me out, even if they won't necessarily vote in my direction. They might not necessarily put active opposition in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think a turning point in Ottawa was when the folks from the Ottawa Mission, which is one of our major homeless shelters in Ottawa and is highly respected. Everybody goes down at Christmas and Thanksgiving to serve the dinner and take the photo op. You know, the fantastic organization. But when they came to committee on the renovictions piece, and they said, we have a situation where people come into shelter, they finally graduate our housing readiness programs, they finally get housing, and then they're renovicted, and then they are back in shelter. And that had a collective gasp from the committee. So those stories are so effective, you know? Or for me, it was like, okay, I know so-and-so really cares about veterans. Can we find a veteran who was renovicted to come and tell his story, right? Like sometimes it's about finding the exact right lever. Emily, I'm curious from you, tell me about those first conversations you had when you were pitching Housing Works. Because this is kind of an unlikely program to try to get a private landlord to trust you, to put a young person coming out of foster care into their very first apartment, and to convince them that it's a good thing to do and not terribly risky. How did the first pitches go?
Not great. It took us a little bit, I think, to perfect our pitch to landlords and developers. And we started with some pretty small landlords, right? So they have, 1, 2, 3 units, and they need these tenancies to work out and these occupancies to work out. So our main pitch from the, when I pitch to any landlord is, you have a tenant vetting process, you have guaranteed rent that is coming from Housing Works. You're not dealing with multiple income sources paying you rent. You have a 24/7 property manager, and you have a team of us who are always there to support whenever we can. And then I get into the nitty-gritty of, these are youth that need homes, and they need safe and affordable homes, and that speaks to a lot of people. We have a lot of landlords who are very, very passionate about the youth that we're supporting. They're very passionate about working with our youth in other ways. We have a lot of folks who are like, how can I do more? How can I engage more? How can I work with your organization at a bigger level? But for a lot of the landlords, those points that really hit home are the guaranteed rent, the support that we can offer. The tenant vetting process is huge, especially for some of our bigger developers where we're putting multiple folks into a building. Still scattered site, however, they do have different concerns than some of our smaller landlords who may be taking one youth at a property and one youth at another property. So that tenant vetting process, which we've revamped a few times now to make sure that we are matching folks to the appropriate housing for them. We're matching folks to the appropriate landlord, and we're still following that housing first, preferences and youth choice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty easy sell to be like, we are giving you a free property manager available 24 hours a day, which sometimes functionally is either you or your executive director, as I said, driving with a plunger at 2 in the morning to help a 17-year-old. But you're doing it, which is great. Yeah. Before we open up for questions, is there anything you would do differently in the way you built your campaign, looking back on it? Or tell me about a misstep. Tell me about something that didn't go as well as you thought it would, or a bump in the road. Michelle, maybe we'll start with you with Anchor, because I'm sure there were a lot. Now, I will say this process took longer than we would have wanted it to, because sometimes you have to go at the speed of community. But I'll tell you, when they first came back with a recommendation for this program, I was like, what do you mean it's going to take a year to implement? Like, we need it now. Our community's in crisis. So there was a feeling like it did take a long time, because I know there was a lot of lively debate. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, but I also think at the same time, when we got the funding letter, we were expected to have it up and fully operational, a 24/7 service in 2 organizations that did not do 24/7. We were expected to hire close to 30 staff, train them, develop all of the policies and procedures, scheduling, buy vans, get them labeled, do all the protocols, do the training with the police and paramedics, get them on board, because we also wanted 911 operators to send calls that were appropriate for us to 211, and we had to do that within 6 months. And both of our organizations only had 2 like HR people, and we also had other hiring and stuff that was going on. It was a bit intense, just a wee bit, and so I will say that you know Ariel calling on. We had a soft launch that we actually in our first 6 weeks of calls, we had more calls. So our comparator was Toronto, who had already been doing this and had already gone live, right? And they were already coming into the place where they were looking at expanding out of their 4 pilot areas. And within the first 6 weeks, we had more phone calls from people in the 6 weeks in our pilot time in a smaller geographic area than all of the city of Scarborough had gotten in that same time period after being operational for 3 years. So we were completely overwhelmed by the calls, and at the same time, Ariel was on messages to me, "This can't take this long when somebody calls." And I'm like, "They're learning." You know, sorry. It's okay. They're learning. We're working on our script. It's been exactly 2 weeks, right? But I also get it because, I mean, part of the thing that is we were one of the highest areas in the city, in Centertown and West Centertown, of calls to 911 for mental health and substance use crisis. And there was one other area, community of Overbrook. And I do think that the city ended up choosing our area to go with first because Somerset West and Centertown Community Health Center actually had a reputation. I mean, we had to go through an RFP process. We weren't automatically selected, but they were really hopeful that we would apply. And we had a reputation. We were already actually working with this community in a way that wasn't ready to go, I think, in the Overbrook community in the same way. And so we had a high level of trust, and we had similar type programs not running in quite the same operation. It wasn't so much, I think, from city council, but it did put pressure on people calling in. The expectations is that because we had a similar program operating, that we made a number of changes to, and people were like, "But we like the DOPE program. How come we can't have the DOPE program?" And it was like, well, because this is a different program. And so I think that, you know, that was part of it. I will also say that one of the other pieces that we didn't really think about is, and this is a bit of that inside baseball piece. The city council had actually created the Guiding Council on Mental Health and Substance Use, who had made the recommendation based on all the consultation that was in part because of the advocacy from all of the community. And we had a number of things where city and some city politicians and some city staff weren't really clear on the different roles and responsibilities of the Guiding Council and ourselves. And so we had a lot of missteps in communication and planning and coordination around the launch and follow-up related to a number of items that I think that we didn't really understand some of the pieces of politics that were happening, not so much with our direct city council, but with some city councilors who were really attached to the words of the Guiding Council and thought that they should be continuing to direct our work. And ourselves and Somerset West were like, treated it like any other funding agreement and kind of went like, okay, we've got it now, leave us alone, let us do our thing. And both city staff and council were like, no, this is a highly political, highly visual piece. We will be working very closely, including the piece of, and this is another piece where we had some missteps of, again, and this isn't Ariel or us doing anything wrong, but Ariel would be like, I gotta know, what's the numbers? What are you doing? What's the numbers? What's the numbers? How many people are we seeing? Oh my God, that's amazing. And then she would go on media and do interviews and go, oh my God, this anchor program, and they've seen this, and they're seeing numbers higher than Toronto. And the city staff would be having hissy fits because they hadn't briefed city council yet. Sorry. Not sorry. So I think sort of us learning the politics of city wanting to control the messaging with council, us having to control the messaging with our boards and our staff, and our city councillor who is living in this area with people sending her, text messages and email all the time, wanting to say, actually, there's something that's really working and I'm excited to share it with you, created some tension.
Yeah, I mean, I will say something we did learn too is also, I think the nature of the crisis changed from when Anchor was originally conceived to when it was actually launched. So the initial incident that prompted the creation of the Guiding Council was the death of a young man by police. And it was really focused on mental health crisis. But by the time it launched, our overdose crisis has exploded, such that we have a huge problem with public drug use also since the provincial government closed down our supervised consumption without our site, without our consent. And so what was happening was people were calling Anchor, but they were saying, they were complaining about public drug use and basically wanted like almost like cops to move people along. And that's not actually the role of Anchor. Anchor's role is to deal with an actual crisis. So it became this argument of like, well, but if police won't come and Anchor won't come, who will come? So then I had to fight for funding we're working on scaling up other outreach programs to help with loitering and public drug use, which is an enormous problem, but it sort of sits in that liminal space between acceptable and crisis. It's sort of somewhere in between. So Anchor was getting a lot of calls and saying, sorry, we can't come for that. And then people were getting mad and sending me emails. Emily, do you have anything you would do differently, or do you have a story of something that sort of went off the rails and you had to scale back? I'm sure you have some toilet plunger stories.
I do. I won't share those with you today. I'll spare you. I think the main thing we would have done differently is the lunch and learn earlier. However, so after the lunch and learn, as you know, our program expanded quite rapidly, and there were definitely some things that we did not see coming. So one of those things, perfect timing, as always, our rent supplement program guidelines changed. And that actually, they no longer aligned with the occupancy agreement we were using. So we did work with Ariel, and we worked with some other city councilors to bring a motion to council so that we could get an exemption so that our occupancy agreement would work, because we now had 139 units that we were hoping were going to have housing allowances attached to the youth that were going to be living in them. So we were very lucky that was granted. So that was a great step, however, not something that we saw coming, and gave us a moment of panic in the beginning. And then also just working with the city, bringing that many units on, and we are a smaller organization, the amount of money that it was going to take us to be able to pay these landlords rent every 15 days for many, many months, it was a lot. So speaking with the city, going back and forth with the city, regarding the funding that was going to be needed. Also, altering our agreement with the city. The biggest developer that we were working with had to go back and forth on their end with the city. So it took many, many months, many more months than we were expecting this to take. In August, right before the beginning of August, we were like, oh, this is going to happen. I was about to go on vacation, and I was like, oh no, I'm going to push back my vacation so that I can be here. And then I came back from vacation, and it still hadn't been finalized. So, the timeline was unexpected. We knew that going into this project, we were going to need many, many more staff to be able to support the youth that were moving into these units. Every week we were asking our executive director, John, can we just hire them? We'll just hire them and it'll be fine and we'll get the funding, and fingers crossed. And he was like, absolutely not. We are not doing that. No. So that went on, many weeks, many months. And then September 15th, we moved our first 20 people into the units with just the team that was existing. So I think, I don't know what the answer is, to be very honest, when you can't control the timeline and when you're going back and forth with the city, you have another party that's also going back and forth with the city on their end. But yeah, if I could change that, I would have changed that, because having, we just finally hired 5 new staff. Woo! They're going to be a great asset to our team moving forward. But predicting those timelines and doing a little more research on, those those things that could go wrong or those things that might come up.
Well, in the end, it took a motion to council
Yes.
from Laura Dudas, who's the chair of community services, to ensure that this program, because it's structured differently, could qualify for a specific city subsidy. So
Yeah.
sometimes, again, that's finding your councillor ally and being like, this rule is not working for us, can we change the rule? Because that is something that only we can do, staff can't do that. So last question before we go to questions from the public. Olivia, do you have something you would do differently or a cautionary tale for people?
So, I mean, for us, I think like the hardest part was just the length of the campaign. Like we first launched the demands in 2020. The bylaw took effect in just this past January. So, that was 5 years of, our members who were, facing this issue. So it was, got difficult towards the end, just that so much damage was done. So, just keeping, our members like active on the campaign, it was pretty painful for a lot of our members to like be rent-evicted and like still fight for it. The bylaw wasn't going to be retroactive. So I think just the length of the campaign was really difficult. I'm not sure what we could have done differently, but if there was a way that we could have got to maybe like more senior like city staff early on to really understand like what their hesitation was to kind of speed it up. At one point it did come out kind of similar to Ottawa that like maybe resources was an issue and the city hired a consultant, which we delegated in support, but like found out later that it was just more consultation. It was City of Hamilton city staff that, ended up being the ones, writing the bylaw. So yeah, just if we ever gonna do it again, I just really emphasizing, I think we did this messaging just, like City Hamilton staff, I think proud of like the bylaw now and like the city really highlights and promotes it. So just getting them to maybe the earlier that, how important if they could be the leader, that'd be something the city could brag about if they were the first city, which we ended up being. But yeah, just 5 years was way too long. So, when the community speaks up, the city needs to listen and, take it seriously. It's one thing to, win a motion, which we did several times, but then just, all that behind the scenes that, we just saw too many delays.
Okay, I feel less bad because our process will take 3 years from beginning to end. But I mean, it was very frustrating because I had Ottawa Acorn people being like, well, why don't you just put forward a motion right now? And I was like, no, I have to pace it this way to get staff on side with me. Like, this is how they've asked me to do it, and I will not get support at the table if I don't do it this way. But that is a hard thing when they're like, but people are being evicted now. And I'm like, yes, but if this fails, I can't bring it back. So I have to have a political strategy so it'll succeed. So if we take a little longer, we may actually win. So anyway, all right, thank you so much to our amazing panel. Yes, let's round of applause for them. All amazing women, I will also say. We're an all-women panel. So I'm now very happy to open up to questions. I think we have a roving mic somewhere. Do we not have a roving mic? Okay. Oh, there's a mic over there if folks don't mind. Actually, Isabel, do you mind if it comes off the stand, you can just like rove so people don't have to line up? Yay, this is Isabel who works for me. Okay. And the first hand I saw was Emily in front here, and then other Emily in the front. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to your awesome presentations. So I think you all in your own ways are doing as much as you can to prevent criminalization in community, which I think is really important. And I had a question for you about something that you said offhand, Michelle, which was the advice around how you characterized your work, and you were advised to move away from community safety, I think, and I wanted to know why.
Actually, no, we switched to rethinking community safety.
Okay.
And I actually can't remember what the other wording was, but we actually had more language specifically related that was sounding very anti-police. And so part of it was I'm personally not opposed and believe in a lot of the defund police movement. But that was getting traction as resistance around funding something. And so when we were looking at it, we changed our language to looking at community safety.
Oh, good.
And
that became more palatable.
Okay. And it was a tension, though, because also community activists felt we had sold our souls.
Yeah.
in some ways, it was really good because nobody in the community liked our report. I know the politicians liked it, but a lot of community members, those who were on the very strong defund police, were like, it's not strong enough. Those who were on the more conservative, police have a role, thought we were being too radical. So like nobody was satisfied. It was great. But it really resonated with the politicians, and it really, and so I think there's also something about finding the path that there's lots of ways to get to that path. And so in other areas, so right now we're bringing forward, we're working with the city now on a warming and caring bus, kind of like a mobile drop-in. But I came back from this idea from my colleagues doing it in Thunder Bay. Yeah, I know, you guys are like rock stars. And so we're bringing, so I came back and I went, oh my God, there's this really amazing thing. And because we had a lot of deaths last year on the street from people freezing and refusing to go into shelter. And so it's like, how can we get this as a 24/7 mobile drop-in center? Well, we're not going to be able to get a 24/7 drop-in center, but we're going to focus on, instead of, there's a lot of programs in the city that are doing the end of day and until 10 and 11. So we're looking at doing something for the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Because we're getting lots of issues when people are being kicked out of shelter in the morning and then nothing to go. And after COVID, the number of places that will not allow people to hang out has stuck. And so in that morning period of time, how can we do that before a lot of other places are open at 9 or 10? But so part of it, though, is reframing it in a way and working with the city to fit the federal emergency fund. So I think that that's also the kind of piece, is that you need to be paying attention to what the language is and listening to that feedback from funders, from both the bureaucratic staff as well as political staff around the language that they can help sell the story. And for us, it doesn't matter. I mean, I still have staff who are, we pay a very good living wage, or more than a living wage. It's well above the living wage. It's for our community, our crisis response workers, but they are all individuals with lived and living experience, and the vast majority of them do not have any kind of post-secondary education, and for that, within the training piece, within that we also only hired, or mostly hired, from Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities, because that's who is being impacted in most particular when police are being called in the criminalization of both mental health and substance use, as well as people who don't have housing. And so we are every bit as radical within how we've operationalized it. And so if we want to make nice words on top, that's what we make the nice words on top.
As someone who worked in communications for my whole career, you just got to know your audience. It doesn't mean you're not doing the work. Just got to know how you talk about it. Okay, Isabel. I think I saw you with the red blazer back there next. Just a few rows back. Yeah, awesome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for an amazing presentation. My name is Dagmar, and I'm from an organization in Peel called REST. And we also run a head listing model for our solution to homelessness for BIPOC youth in the region of Peel. So my question is to Operations Homes. I want to understand, do you guys, just curious as to how you address vacancy losses within the model, if that's something that you do see. And my other question is, do you ever have causes for eviction?
We definitely have vacancy loss. We try to mitigate that as much as possible. And our biggest, method to do that is our team works very well together. We meet every morning and go over the youth that are on our caseload who are able to go into units that we might have coming up. And our landlords, some of them have been very great to work with, and if, someone needs to be rehoused or we need to move someone out, we're able to, work with them, whether they might, give us a break on half the month rent if we need to. But we do have some private donors as well that have donated, and that specifically supports like our vacancy loss, which has been great. In the course of the 3 years that we have been running Housing Works, we've had one situation where we have had to terminate an occupancy agreement, and it was because there was a serious safety risk to other occupants in the building. This person was supported in moving out. They were supported in, accessing other housing within Ottawa, and it was really unfortunate. But we do our best to, if we need to rehouse people to, housing that's more suitable to them, we're able to do that. So yeah, that was our one and only time where we've had an occupancy agreement. So we've been very lucky in that sense so far.
Okay.
Hi, Patricia Franks from the Intentional Community Consortium. I have two questions, one political and one financial. So first of all, we know as not-for-profits, sustainable funding over time to keep all this going. Where does money come from? And, is it constant grant writing, or is there some, sustainable sponsorship money that can support this initiative, especially if you're now paying rent for someone else and having that support? And secondly, from a political point of view, we know that every time there's an election, whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal, rules change. And I know you mentioned one around once you have an occupancy agreement, but when you have great politicians involved in municipal government and they're then not reelected, is some of the policy that you've managed ingrained enough that it continues no matter who happens to be there?
That's a really great question. Well, I know in Hamilton, you have a bylaw. It's not going anywhere, right? Unless somebody voted to repeal it. Maybe we'll start with Michelle. Because you've been through now 2 different councils working on this project.
Yeah, but I also think that, so we live in a fairly progressive kind of ward, and so I can't imagine somebody not getting elected in this ward who wasn't supportive of this. But the change in the council overall is significant. So I will just say that part of the work that we're doing now, because the funding that we have for our anchor project was 3-year federal funding that actually went to police. They were the only ones who could apply through it for Solicitor General. And it's an agreement with the city that the city got a chunk of that to do their community, to contribute to their community safety and well-being plan. And so part of the conversations that we are having now is with all of the council around the importance of this initiative and sending that data, because the police are also doing a push around that. They now see that they have a mobile crisis unit with a social worker and a police officer as being the equivalent, and that's their preferred solution. And they're not particularly supportive of the Anchor initiative. And so part of that is having the conversation without bashing police and talking about the benefits of our project, not the least of which is that, we have post-crisis follow-up staff to try and get at the core and the heart and supporting people so that we're helping to break that cycle about why they're in constant crisis. Again, I'm not sure that Somerset West and Centretown are really good examples. We do have our funding tightened. Both of us spend a lot of time advocating around resources, but also both of us have been around for a long time, living in like really weird, economically challenged areas, but also areas that have a lot of gentrification in it. And so, I have a very substantial reserve fund, which allows me to make some decisions that I can take some gambles on, that even some of my colleagues in community health centers, that they just don't have the reserve funds and they can't. And that I just want to acknowledge the huge privilege that comes from that.
I'll also say, I think having 3 years of funding from the feds made this kind of an easy yes for city council, I think the rubber is going to hit the road when we say this is a core city service that we need to scale citywide, and we need to either take money from the police levy or we need to raise taxes. That's when it's going to get hard, and that will be my political battle next term. Right now, I got 2 more years left on a federally funded pilot that everyone is pretty much happy with, but it has real implications when you have to change the way you spend actual city money, or if you're taking something away from police. So, like, I am prepared for that fight. It's not going to be an easy one.
All right. Thank you so much. Janet Lynn, City of Aurelia. So my question, this is very inspiring, by the way. And in Aurelia, we are really trying to do some of this work. We are actively doing anti-poverty work and working on a poverty reduction plan that will actually bring about change and not just sit on a shelf. We're also have an emergency treatment fund grant to open a physical day center, essentially. But my question is for Ariel, because we are very much in our city working in an environment, an administrative environment that is not supportive, or rather supportive of doing things only that are in the Municipal Act. So I'm just wondering, I am constantly being told this is not my job, and
Staff?
by staff, and an integrity commissioner complaint could be made. I'm just wondering how you push back against that.
I mean, I think find friends in other jurisdictions where they have had rulings that show what's actually within municipal jurisdiction. And I think also the economic argument really helps, like with rent evictions, for example, which strictly speaking is adding a whole other level of regulation at the municipal level that we don't want to do. But I'm trying to get data on how many evictions are leading to homelessness and how much this is actually costing our system every year. It's very, very hard to get that data. But the reality is, if people are evicted into homelessness, it costs us X number of dollars a year per person. So it does have a cost, right? So with the economic conservatives, I would say go with the economic argument. With staff, I would say find your allies, and there's some great allies from Ottawa city staff in here if you want to talk to any of them from a housing and homelessness branch. And lean on legal decisions from other jurisdictions. We have community legal services in Ottawa. They've been really great. So they could tell us what was happening at the landlord-tenant board, and they could come and say, this is why the existing regime is not working. And then, borrow great ideas from other places. Anchor, we borrowed from Toronto. Rent eviction bylaw, we borrowed from Hamilton. They borrowed from New West. So, build on other ones. But, give me a call anytime because, if we have a legal decision we can share from you, why would jurisdiction be any different in Ottawa than it is in Aurelia?
I just also want to address that because we also get pushback from city staff, again, when our coalition goes forward, just in general, not just about Anchor, that the city does not want to get into funding things that should be the province's responsibility. And arguably, Anchor actually should be the province's responsibility. Arguably, there's lots of stuff that the City of Ottawa has made decisions to fund that should be the province's responsibility. We also go the economic argument, which is that the supports that you are providing and where we are returning, for example, until the recent federal decision about automatic tax returns actually return, and we had millions upon millions of dollars returned into the community, and this is where people are spending it in the small businesses and in the neighborhoods. So we presented at the finance and economic development related to that when we're normally regulated to community services. We talk about the expenses of what you do fund, which is the police services and a significant portion of the paramedics, which are blocking up the hospitals, which is absolutely a provincial jurisdiction, but you are getting the calls because somebody couldn't get an ambulance fast enough. And so we make the connection with other services that the city does have to fund and say, this is what this is costing you, if in fact you are not supporting some of these other pieces. And we will also go and we are also doing all of the deputations. I think this is the other piece, is that we actively demonstrate how we're doing deputations when there is consultations to the provincial budget and the federal budget and how we are submitting our also deputations around talking about the importance of that. Because I do think it's also recognizing that the city does have, or the municipality does have real financial pressures. And we often go to them of saying, how can we help you solve the problems you're trying to solve? And I think that that's really important in this conversation. And there's lots of ways that we can be supporting each other in solving these really persistent problems that we have in the community, but that they are solvable, like they really are.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is, downtown Ottawa took a tremendous hit due to the shift in the federal government work pattern and hybrid work and work from home. And I represent a neighborhood that was in serious decline. And so what I just kept saying at every table I was at, with every funder, with the Board of Trade, is we can't economically revitalize downtown if we have unsheltered homelessness. We cannot revitalize downtown if people don't feel safe. So I was able to convince the city, when we got money from this deal with the province, to include it as part of economic development, to have outreach workers. Right? Like, this has to go hand in hand with economic development too. So we were able to kind of lever it in and get a $1.5 million in funding for outreach workers by saying, this is economic. This is not just social, this is economic.
And I will just say is that our Centertown BIA actually held a fundraiser for us during Winterlude. Like, our BIA held did fundraisers for us and works with us on community cleanup and street cleanup, because they actually, it's not the same for all the BIAs in some of the areas, but I'm really fortunate that our local, our immediate one, sees us as working in partnership for exactly that reason.
Okay, well, we're right here at 3:15. I think maybe I'll suggest if anyone has any more questions, come up and talk to us. Again, my name is Ariel Troster. You can find me online. This is Michelle. And we thank you so much also to Emily and Olivia. Please follow their organizations too, Operation Come Home, Ottawa Acorn, and the Centertown Community Health Center. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the conference.